Some of the best advice I ever got was from an old Filipino man who was my neighbor in California back in the late 90s. We lived in the same apartment complex. He lived on the second floor across from where my apartment was. And somehow we became friends. And he was about 70 years old during that time, and his wife was 50. They had a little 9-year-old boy who they fed McDonald's to every day. They had both immigrated from the Philippines and was living in California. So I used to go up to his apartment and we'd talk about everything. We talk about politics, talk about religion, and he would tell me about the Philippines. He used to always say, remember, haste makes waste. Haste makes waste. I never understood what he was talking about back then. But what he was telling me is that when you rush into things, you make mistakes. And he used to always say, I can't wait till I can get my Social Security because I'm going to go back to the Philippines. He said, I can go back to the Philippines and live like a king. I said, really? He said, yes. He said, on the amount of money I get, and this was back in the 90s, he said, I can live like a king. I can have maid, I can have driver, everything. So he had plans to live out the rest of his days in comfort. So during that time in the late 90s, I was younger and I was married. And at the time I was going through some marital issues. And I would go up and talk to him and he would give me some advice about marriage and women. Now that I think back on many of our conversations, I think what he was really trying to tell me was this, that instead of living this complicated life with a wife who I didn't really get along with and having all these bills and life being so complicated here in the U.S., that I can move to the Philippines and live like a king. Living like a king means enjoying life, traveling, having a good woman, eating good food, healthy food, not all the stress and issues that we deal with as Americans here in the U.S. And many years later, after I got divorced and went through some life issues, what that old man said came back into my mind about the Philippines. So I ended up doing some research. I ended up meeting some Filipinos there in California, got involved with their community, their church, and finally met a girl online. And I made a trip over to the Philippines, stayed for a week. I enjoyed it so much. When I came back home, nothing felt the same. So 6 months later, I moved over there and stayed there for quite a long time. So here's my advice to you. When travel opens back up to the Philippines, get you a ticket, go over there and check it out. If you like it, if you have the means to, make the move. You won't regret it. Go live like a king or close to it as possible.